Hi everyone, we've got a nice dramatic sky snow scene today. It's a nice simple draw after last week's puppy. What I've done is I've moved the sky down a little bit. I want to make a little bit more of the sky, so my horizon line is about halfway, just lower than halfway. You've got the hill in here, a rough idea of where these distant hills are, and then just a rough idea of where the trees are coming and the path, the footprints in the snow just here. Colours wise, I've got Naples yellow. If you haven't got Naples yellow, you can use raw sienna, permanent rose, cobalt blue. They're all about the same consistency with a bit of water. Then I've got Windsor blue and burnt sienna. If you haven't got Windsor blue, it's intense blue or phthalo blue, and that's making a dark green, which is going to work on the trees. And then I've got cobalt blue and burnt sienna to make a grey as well to go into the sky. Okay, so we're going to start off with the sky. We've got plenty of water in here. You can come over these distant trees. Make sure you give it a good layer of water. You can come over it twice. Make sure your brushes are nice and clean before you start. We're going to come into the Naples yellow first of all. So a little bit of the Naples yellow, and rinse my brush out, then dip into the rose. Just make sure you haven't got too much of the rose on the brush. You don't want to eliminate the Naples yellow with it. You can sweep through. You're wanting a peachy colour in places. And there's not a huge amount of the cobalt blue in the sky, but you're going to bring a little bit in. So a little bit of a circular motion with your brush. Keep pushing that down. You're going to get a nice cloud effect. Remember, you've got this piece of light here, so you don't want to come over that section. Give my brush a rinse, dry that off, and then you're going to come into the grey. Just dab off a little bit, you don't want it to go too far. So I'm going to come into that top corner first of all. It's all quite dramatic, this grey. And it's a case of popping it in and letting it do its thing. Make sure when you're coming into these wispy bits that you haven't got too much on the brush. Then when you lift off, it won't explode and go everywhere. So you can just come in and create these wispy effects. So if you need to pick up more paint, dab it off a little bit on the kitchen towel. You should be able to spread a tiny bit on the brush quite far. And it's just making sure you've got that sense of that light happening. The sky's a lot in this picture. It's what's going to create the real atmosphere. So I want you to just focus on it a little bit to make sure that you're creating that effect of the light here. Okay, I'm going to dry that off now. Okay, so that's dried nicely now. What I'm going to do is just bring a bit of colour into the snow, because the sky always reflects colour into the snow. I don't want it to be pure white. So I'm going to bring some water onto this bottom section. And then you're going to reflect some of the colours from the sky. So I'm going to start again with the Naples yellow. And then come into the rose. You just need to make sure that you aren't too strong with these colours. You don't want them to be so vibrant that it looks like it's stripy snow. So they need to be slightly lighter than the sky. And then into the cobalt blue. If some of the cobalt blue and rose mix, that will be quite nice. That would make a nice shadow colour on the snow. So don't worry about that. Try not to mix the Naples yellow. So this is all soft shadow at the moment. So we're not worrying about hard shadow, it's soft shadow. Okay, so I'm going to dry that off as well. Okay, so I've got a wet round number 10 ready to go, and I've got paint on my number 6. I'm going to start with a little bit of the cobalt blue, and we're going to start at these very distant hills. So I'm going to use the cobalt blue and the grey. If I just twist a little bit like this, it makes it easier for me to do it from this side and not go in front of the light. So I'm going to come along this edge. This is on to dry. And we're going to wet underneath in a minute. So you're coming along and you're creating this distant hill. I'm going to bring a line underneath. Keep making sure your brush is quite loaded with paint. You don't want to create a watermark where the paint's drying. And then my brush is loaded with water. and I'm going to touch the bottom of the paint and wet further, so that I just start to get that moving and that softness. Then I'm coming into the grey, and I'm going to start to create some more hills. There's bits of hills, there's bits of land, there's bits of foliage in here. There's odd little bits of snow. You're going for an impression of. Don't try and get exact. You're just working forward. You can dab back into the cobalt blue if you want to at any point. You can come over and create stronger lines as well, so don't be afraid to do that. I'm just creating a sense of hills in the distance. So I'm going to leave some bits dry, I'm going to leave some bits wetter. So I'm going to come in with a dab of water again now, so just in places. So you're getting that nice soft effect. As you come forward, you've got more trees appearing, so we're going to move into the green. And we can come back into this and create some more defined hills if we want to. But because it's a distance scene, you don't want it to be too defined. Then if I just dampen, so I just keep alternating brush. So this is again my round number 10, and then I'm going to come into this dark green with my number 6 now. And I'm just going to start, so I've dampened this bottom section, and this needs to be a little bit blurry because there's snow at the bottom as well, so you don't want to go too mad creating a sharp edge. So I'm just dabbing in and starting to create some tree shapes. If it's wet enough, it should do it without much effort. If it's too wet, then you've just got to wait a few seconds. And then come back in. So you should get this sense of it spreading and creating like tree-like shapes. I'm just keeping my tip of my brush upright and just creating that one's a bit dry there, so I'm going to come in with a bit of water. It's a bit dry there as well, so I'm touching in with a bit of water. You don't want this line to be too dry at the bottom either, so I'm touching in with a bit of water. Then as these start to dry, you can come back in and just add a little bit more, just in places, just so it looks more defined. Overall, you should get a really nice sort of soft, snowy effect without much effort. Just going to bring a bit of water into this bit. Got some coming up here. So this has started to dry in the back, but I'm just bringing in a few little bits. So I'm getting a really nice effect there. I'm quite happy with that. As long as it's softened in one side, it tends to work. I'm just going to come into the grey a little bit again. Just pull out just a couple of these bigger hills in the background. This is nearly dry now in the background, so I can get away with doing that and getting that little bit more definition just appearing there. I'm going to dry that off now. Okay, so that's dried nicely now. I'm going to come in and do these trees one by one. So I need this to be damp. I'm going to go on very carefully with my soft wash brush, and I'm going further than the tree itself. Just take a little bit of extra water off. Give a good rinse of your brush, and then come in to the dark green, and you want to get a nice base on. This is far too wet. Okay, I'm just going to pause a second, let it. Okay, so this is a lesson in waiting for the paper to the shine to go off. I've tried a couple of times and it's still quite wet. I keep going like this, look, just damp brush, clean damp brush, just lifting that paint back to stop it going any further. You just got to keep trying till you're at a point that it's not exploding. Lesson in waiting for water to just be at the right consistency. Right, so I'm going to go for it. I want it to be blurry, but I just don't want to lose all definition. And so you've just got to wait for that sheen to just be going. It's very hard to gauge it sometimes, especially when it's quite, today's quite a dark, gloomy day, so it's hard for me to see the paper in here. I'm going to come down, so this is just my round number 6. I'm going to get that base on and then get that dried to stop it moving. Okay, let's pause you a second. Okay, so when you've got that basin and that's dry, then you can come back over to create some more definition, because these are fairly close trees, but we want that softness there. So I'm going to come in, just create You can do these one by one and then dry in between. You want to just dab in places with water so it's not all hard. It's that balance of it being hard and soft that creates a nice picture. So I can dry that one off and then come back into the next. And then I'm going to come into the next one. So I've dried that first one off. This is a much denser tree, so you can take more paint in. So just make sure you're not coming over the edge of the softness that you've already created. You want plenty of paint on here. And you follow those angles that the branches are going, and then I've got my round number 10 wet again, and I'm just going to dab into places so that I've got hard and soft edges. It's not all hard. When you get to the top, just make sure you take it a bit further into the sky so you haven't got those hard edges. If it runs too much like that, just damp brush, take it back, push it back. Just controlling it. I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so that's all dried off now. Now I've got a really nice depth with those trees. It's up to you whether you want to put these little spindly trees in the background or not. I've decided that they're not going to really add much to the picture, though I might put a few spindly bits down in here. I quite like the path coming through. So what I'm going to focus on now is just starting to get the shadows in, because that will make the snow really glow. So what I've got is a cobalt blue that's quite watery, and I've taken a tiny touch of rose into it, only the tiniest bit, so it's still quite blue, and I'm going to start to pop some shadows on. So the trick is to make sure that it's not too bright. You don't want it too bright, and you want it to just create that sort of cast shadow. So I'm going to bring this and just start to create these harder shadows, and I will have double shadow in here, so there'll be another layer coming over after. So don't feel that you've got to capture everything in one go. You can vary the pressure of the brush to get these more delicate shadows. Concentrate on getting the deep sort of sweeping bits first, so you know the angles you're working to. You're just creating these random shapes, which random is always harder than you think it's going to be. You think, yeah, I can do random, but it can be quite tricky. So just vary the pressure on your brush. Vary the angle of your brush. That's quite a useful tool to make sure that you're making random marks. You can also dab off. So it's not very often that I advocate dabbing off, but with snow, if you've got a dry bit of kitchen towel and you want to create a bit more of a broken shadow, dabbing does work. So it's one time that I will let you dab. This is one of those times where less is more, or you can really just go for it and keep fiddling and popping loads of shadow in. It's just getting a nice balance, really. Come down this side. I'm going to dry this off in a second, and then I'm going to come in with some second shadow. Okay, so I've dried that off, and if you squint at the picture you'll see where it's darker and where that double layer of shadow needs to go. So I want you to concentrate on just coming in with a second layer just in places. It just really does add depth. So it's just where you've got these darker footprints where it's deeper. So it's not everywhere, but where it's deeper, you've got that double shadow layer. It just gives that effect that the snow just looks that bit deeper. And it's really nice because it's the way that it's leading your eye past and round back by the trees is really good. It's a really lovely composition. Nice and effective. And a few bits along here. Okay, I'm going to dry that off. I've twizzled upside down. That's nice and dry, and I've now got my line writer, and I'm going to put some of these little twiggy bits in. Now, it's up to you if you want to put these in or not. I think they will add something here in the foreground. A little bit of interest. I'm not so sure behind the trees, but you can do either. Just make sure that they look quite random. And this is just the grey that I'm using, the mix of the grey that we've used in the sky. So I'm not introducing any other colours at this stage. Then if I twizzle back round, just with a damp brush, just going to soften those in at the bottom so they're not floating and they're grounded. Okay, so you can do the same for these trees up here if you want those there. I don't want them there, I'm quite happy without them. So we're all done for today. See you next week.